Okay, so let's talk about some of the options that come or that you can get with this system. So the guys at Pilot Workshops, when they originally put these systems together, they recommended the Thrustmaster T16000M stick, and that is what comes with the system. And largely that was because there were no good value options in yokes. In other words, all the yokes that were affordable sucked. And really the only good yoke that they could recommend would be the Yoko, which costs $1,000. It's a great yoke. It's our favorite yoke. When you throw out price, it's our favorite yoke. But now, since we originally put those systems together, a new yoke has hit the market. And it fits in between the Logitech and the CH and that big gap up to the Yoko, and that is the honeycomb yoke. And there's going to be a separate video on the product page, probably right below this one, which talks in great detail about the honeycomb yoke. But know this, it is a very, very good yoke. It's a solid yoke. It's got a metal shaft. You can just tell by the weight that it's much better made. It's got a switch panel here, which I'll tilt up, and you can kind of see all the switches here for the various lights is mainly what this is for. It also has a starter switch over here, which may be a little hard to see. But again, watch the separate video on that. So if you decide that you want a yoke and you want one of these Pilot Workshop systems, you can still do it without paying tons more money. You can simply pay a couple of $100 and you get this really nice honeycomb yoke, and then we'll pair that with a Logitech throttle to go with it, because you'll need a throttle. Now another option that we have is the RealSim Gear 530. Now you might say, well, my plane has a 430, I don't want a 530. Well, basically all a 530 is a bigger screened 430, or a 430 with a bigger screen. The layout of the buttons is very similar to a 430, so if you're working with a 430, you can still use this for training, and then you should be able to make that switch back when you get into the plane quite easily. Now this is by no means required. It's just a nice to have. Hear that click of the buttons and the knobs? I mean, it's just so much nicer to use this than to have to grab the mouse and come over here and click. Now, if you don't want this unit, that's perfectly fine. You can click on the GPS and it'll bring it up into a window here that you can drag around the screen, put it anywhere you want, and then you can click with the mouse and change the frequencies like that. So certainly doable, because this adds about $450 to the cost of the system. And if you're not doing a lot with the 530 or the 430, then of course it's not something that you necessarily need to have. But you just click on the GPS and it'll bring it up here and you can work it, and you don't have to have the RealSim Gear 530. And if you get this from us, we'll install the plug-in, the artwork, and we'll send you some specific directions on how to get it going. It's really not that hard at all to get going. Do know that the 530 only works with planes that use the X-Plane 530. And that's going to be the majority of planes. But if you find some oddball plane out there that doesn't use the X-Plane 530 and they use their own homegrown version of the 530, then the RealSim Gear may not work. But all the planes that come with X-Plane that have the 530 are compatible, like the Baron and the Cessna 172. So those issues would be few and far between. So lastly, on options, we do have the option for the Yoko. If you want the Cadillac of yokes, the Yoko is definitely the way to go. I would say that don't miss a meal, to spend $1,000 on a yoke. But if you just have to have the very best, then that is the Yoko. Do also keep in mind, though, you'd be giving up the switch panel if you opted for that over the honeycomb. The Yoko doesn't have this switch panel, doesn't have this little starter switch over here, so bear that in mind also. So there you go. There's an overview of some of the options on this super ultra wide system approved by Pilot Workshops.